You're listening to the Paul Young Podcast.
All right, last time we were talking about Martin Schleske and making a violin body and how you have to be an artist and not a planner. You can't be just a mathematician. And relating this to how God works in our lives, not based on a perfect plan, but based on how an artist works with the wood. And the zinger that we ended up with is the perfectionist is content with fulfilling the law. The artist fulfills the sound. And he was talking about how there are certain trees that are called the singers that they log from up in the mountains. Nowadays, Martin goes around with a tuning fork tapping on trees looking for the singers because they created this sound that is the best source for wood to make a violin. So to continue this part 2 of this story, Martin writes, Romans 8:28-30 describes a similar process. Quote, "And those who love God know that all things work together for good for those who are called according to purpose. Those he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. Those he predestined, he called. Those he called, he justified. Those he justified, he glorified." He writes, "It's really quite similar to working on the violin's bulge or curvature. The wood is carefully chosen, called. A good violin builder respects the texture of the wood, and under his fingers he feels the character, the solidity, and the density. This shows him both the possibilities and the limits of the wood. Each of this wood's quirks and characteristics has an influence on the sound it will bring forth. Some trees, like people, have suffered staggering hardships and overwhelming winds in their life. The course of our fibers becomes difficult, one-sided, crooked, and scarred. But like the wood, we reveal our true selves during the small and great ordeals of our lives. These knock on our life and thus make our fibers, our inner structures, audible. If I, as a violin builder, am willing to work with the kind of fiber I get and start creating with what has already become and what is difficult and crooked, how much more God will do so. God's wisdom knows what is necessary to build a unique sound with our texture, our fiber, and our sometimes difficult histories. That is what is meant by called, justified, and glorified in the above text. I will only become a master artist, a creator, if I am willing to work with a despite this particular flaw, this odd structure, this damage. I will give this wood its voice. I will make it sing. While I'm working on a curvature or bulge, I sometimes feel the planer take a different approach. You know, a planer, it's what slowly removes the wood. This shows me, here I have to leave the idea of the curve I had in mind. It may not be pretty, but necessary. Everything that has happened to the wood requires asymmetry. If the fibers were lines definable by math, one could construct an ideal curve, an ideal form already defined before the work even begins. But the fiber course is not perfect, not ideal, and thus the making of a violin body is no construction site. It is an act of creation. Listen to this. It's an act of creation because it is not the wood that yields to the master. It is the master yielding to the wood. It's not the wood that yields to the maker. It is the maker yielding to the wood. The artist has to ask himself what he has on hand. How did this wood grow? What can it become? The intent of the process of creation allows for promised possibilities to unfold. This cannot happen through a rigid plan. Everything depends on the esteem and wisdom the master has for his creation. For our view of life, it is a great difference if we see the world as a creation or a construction. It is not the idea of evolution that robs faith of his breath, but thinking that the world is a divine construction site. This is the difference between a plan and a promise, between subordination and a dialogue, between religion and faith. An almighty engineer subdues the material. Faith in God then means to submit to God. Building violins has taught me otherwise. Creating relates to both what is given and to what has already become. Faith means to trust in the indwelling wisdom of the Creator and the promised possibilities. This is proven in the process itself. The wood finds its own voice in being born again. When I feel the fibers through the roughness of my planer, it is like a dialogue with the wood. Only while I'm working on it do I get clarity on how the curve should be. The wood has its say in this joint creation. A construction is a forcing of a predetermined ideal on the material. Everything has to yield to that idea. Now we're at the heart of legalism, where life is coated in and subdued by unrelenting ideal conceptions. We have arrived at the curse of religion. The justification of a human being in the Romans verse above, first and foremost, means that there is wisdom at work that does justice to life. The real fibers of our life are respected and given a voice. It is an act of love that embraces the imperfect and sees its worth. Love sees all the beauty, the joy, the desire, and hope, the possibilities of the soul, but it also sees all the weaknesses, the disappointments, the sadness, the losses, the pain, the crooked fibers. God's wisdom gets involved in a dialogue in which we have a natural say. Our life is not a construction. It is not done on a drawing board. Creation means that everything that is in the making is becoming in regard to what has already grown. This is brilliant. In a construction, everything that is in the making is under the constraint of what is wanted. That is insufficient. That is pathetic. Scripture shows me that God has the heart of an artist, not a grim construction planner. If the world were the work of a cosmic engineer, he would be in a constant state of discontentedness. We would all suffer from the constant nagging of a dogged designer whose plans just never work out like he intended or expected. Reality could never live up to his spotless, wonderful construction plan. But a true creator knows he not only has to shape, but also endorse and allow. Wisdom allows things to grow and unfold. It is fascinating to view the whole world as a composition, a painting, or a sculpture, or scenes from a great work of art. Works of art can be beautiful and sometimes odd. I am certain that God, having the heart of an artist, has no intention to force reality to obey him at all costs. Wisdom does not know grim determination. The thought of seeing every person as a work of art in progress, an ever-changing and unique expression of God, changes our whole view of others and ourselves. Suddenly, we can see the odd, authentic, fascination, enjoyable, staggering interplay of what is created and what has become of it, what was put into this person and what has grown out of it, what is in the making. We could see people as forms of expression of a great artist, expressions that yearn to be seen, read, and heard. I have a friend named Rob Parsons, and he published a book called Wisdom House. Here's an excerpt that bears on this conversation. Quote, "It isn't just seeming physical disadvantages that can turn into a strength, but life experiences too, even ones that others would naturally run from. Some years ago, a friend of mine attended a lecture on stem cell research in Oxford given by a world-famous geneticist. During the question time, the scientist was asked whether, in the future, it would be possible to clone Beethoven. His answer was a brilliant yes and no. Yes, if you could extract the DNA from the bones in his coffin, you could create a human being who would be an identical twin of Beethoven. Yes, you could probably teach the twin to play the piano at a reasonably high level. But no, because Beethoven's father, who was also his music tutor, was a violent alcoholic. The young Beethoven was very close to his mother, who died when he was a teenager, and he became responsible for raising his two brothers as his father lapsed deeper into alcoholism. He lost his first and only true love. He lived in poverty, weighed down with debts. He suffered from manic depression and, like his father, turned to alcohol. Then, just as Beethoven began to have some interest in his compositions, he began to lose his hearing. The culmination of all these experiences, the tumultuous feelings of rage, love, despair, passion, were poured into his most famously pounding 6 symphonies numbers 3 to 8, which is what we now revere as classic Beethoven. More accomplished musicians may now play or conduct his works, but they can never capture his greatness because that quality was born out of his expression of his own life experience, of being true to himself. Part of what is being said here is an incredible encouragement to those of us who have tragic and traumatic histories, where we've made horrible decisions, where we've done things that were damaging and harmful to others and to ourselves, whether we've experienced being harmed and being abused. And it's saying here that this is a God who climbs into all of that, and in the midst of all that, creates something that is good and right and beautiful, not annihilating our histories, but redeeming them. This God is a redeeming genius, and that is our hope, is in this redeeming genius. When I finished this paper, and I just dotted the last period on the last sentence, the doorbell rang. I have this friend, Bill, who lives in the East Coast, and he's a pastor, and as a side hobby, he does smithing. He'll take 1800s pieces of metal and he will smith them. He will turn them into a gift, which he then gives to friends. It's amazing, right? So the doorbell rings and I open it and UPS is there delivering me a little box. I had no idea, and neither did he. I mean, he didn't know I was writing this piece or even thinking about it. But he sends me a gift. And when I open it up, inside that box are 2 planers, working planers, as bookends that I use for my books in my library, in my office. So I have these 2 planers that came at the same time that I finished writing this piece about the beautiful use of planers as part of creating works of art. And this is how God creates a work of art out of the despite this and despite that. And even though we've been this and we've been harmed this way, the redeeming genius who has always dwelt within us, constantly creating out of the losses of our lives and the strengths of our lives and the weaknesses of our lives, a work of art, unlike any other that will ever exist in the cosmos. Much love to you. Thank you for listening. If you would like to connect with us with inquiries, comments, suggestions, stories, and more, please go to paulyoungpodcast.com. There you're going to find resources and any notes related to any particular podcast. Today, participate with love, do the next right thing, and trust the ripples.